Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to One East Side Spark webinar series. Today is November 3rd, 2021. My name is Christina Hudson. I'm CEO of One Redmond and founding partner of One East Side, and I'm going to be your host for today's program. All right, well, let's get going with our program. Today's webinar, we have representatives from the SBA's Seattle District Office for the latest information, including tips and guidance for navigating the reconsideration process if your application is declined or withdrawn, requesting a loan increase, and there's a new $2 million cap, as well as applying for the EIDL Advance grant. Today, we have Melanie Norton, Deputy District Director from the U.S. Small Business Administration. We also have Janie Sacco, Outreach and Marketing Specialist, and she is also from the U.S. Small Business Administration in the Seattle District Office. And behind the scenes with us today, we have Kathy Griffith, Lending Relations Specialist from the U.S. Small Business Administration, and she'll help us respond to Q&A. And again, don't forget to post your questions. And now I'm going to turn it over to Melanie.
Thanks, Christina. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad you're able to join us to talk a little bit more about the COVID EIDL programs that are still available. But before I get started, just a quick overview of who the SBA is. The U.S. Small Business Administration, we're a federal agency that is dedicated to helping small businesses at every stage of their business cycle, whether it's starting, growing, expanding, or certainly the one we've been focusing on for the past 20 months, which is recovery. During the pandemic, programs like the Paycheck Protection Program, Restaurant Revitalization Fund, the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant, the COVID EIDL program like we're talking about today, collectively, all of those pandemic-specific programs that the SBA has administered has distributed more than $1 trillion in financing to small businesses. Just to put that in perspective, that's approximately 1 out of every 4 federal dollars that has been spent on COVID has gone to small businesses through these SBA relief programs, which is certainly a hefty lift for a small agency that has a few thousand people. And so we certainly have appreciated your patience as we've worked through that. And while that's a significant milestone of dollars delivered to small businesses, we know that there's always room for improvement, and we continue to work on that. And so that's why we're so appreciative to colleagues like Christina and Lori and some of these different partners that are working together to see how we can better serve small businesses. And one of the ways we're doing that through our recovery programs, the one remaining COVID recovery program that we still have funding available for are the COVID Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program and a couple targeted advance programs that Janie is going to be talking a little bit about today. There's still billions of dollars available in these programs. And one of our primary goals is to see as much of that get into the hands of small businesses as possible. So we appreciate you joining today, whether it's something you haven't applied for and are considering as a benefit to your business, or whether you've maybe got a decline and want to look at ways to go through the reconsideration process and any tips and guidance to help you get to that yes. Janie's going to be presenting some information, and Kathy's going to be answering those questions in the chat box to help you successfully navigate that process to get the funding that your business needs. On a closing note, before I turn it over, being a small business owner, even in ordinary non-pandemic circumstances, is an extremely challenging role. And oftentimes it can feel like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders between supporting your customers and clients and your employees and keeping compliant with various regulations. It's a lot to bear, and it can sometimes be a very lonely experience. So in addition to a lot of the great information that our team's going to share today, I hope you also walk away knowing that even though it may feel like it at times, you as a small business owner, you're not alone. The people on this call, the people in these communities, we really are collectively committed to seeing you succeed. We know that small businesses are the backbone of our economy. They employ half of our workforce. They create 2 out of every 3 new net jobs. So we know that the key to getting through this pandemic and our economic recovery is through you and your success. And we are very much invested in that. So with that, I want to thank you for your time, and I want to respect it as well and turn you over to what you really tuned in for today, and that's the information on our COVID program. So I'm going to turn it back over to Janie, and thank you, and hope you benefit from today's presentation.
Thank you, Melanie and Christina. And I'm going to wait for the slides to come up, and there you go. That's me. Next slide, please. What we're going to talk about today is a little bit about the economic injury disaster loan programs themselves and how they have evolved a little bit to what they are right now and the funding that you have access to. But more importantly, what we're going to talk about is the reconsideration process, because we know that there are a lot of you who have applied for either an economic injury disaster loan or the targeted EIDL advance and the supplemental EIDL advance, and you have been declined or received other correspondence. So we're going to walk through some of the information about this reconsideration process and hopefully get you on track where you can finish your process and successfully either obtain the economic injury disaster loan or an increase, or one of the two or both of the advances. So next slide, please. What we have for the basic economic injury disaster loan products are three ranges of dollar amounts up to $2 million. And as indicated on this slide, the first range is from $1,000 at a minimum to $25,000. And for this range, what you see for requirements are a minimum credit score of 570. There is no collateral pledged, and there is no personal guarantee required for these loan amounts. When the loan amounts go up above $25,000 to $500,000, the minimum credit score requirement maintains itself at 570. However, once the loan amount goes over $25,000, the business is required to pledge a Uniform Commercial Code or UCC1 filing on their business assets only. And when the loan amount exceeds $200,000, each 20% or more owner in the business is required to personally guarantee the loan. Once the loan amount exceeds $500,000 up to the maximum $2 million per business, the minimum credit score does increase slightly to 625. And in addition to the UCC filing on the business assets, if the business entity owns real estate, then the SBA will do a deed of trust filing behind any liens that are already on that property. Personal real estate in your personal name is not required to be pledged. And again, because the loan amount exceeds the $200,000, each 20% or more owner would be asked to personally guarantee the loan. On all of these loans, regardless of the dollar amount, for the first 24 months, the payments are deferred. What does that mean? Well, it means that even though you don't have to make a payment, your loan is accruing interest at your designated interest rate of either 3.75 fixed for the life of the loan for a for-profit business, or 2.75 fixed for the life of the loan if your entity is a nonprofit business. And these loans have a 30-year maturity. So again, the first 24 months, you do not need to make a payment. Interest is accruing. At the beginning of the 25th month, your first payment will be required, as being due, and your amortization of your outstanding balance plus the accrued interest is really repaid over a 28-year period of time. There's no prepayment penalty on these loans, so you can pay them off at any time. You can also do additional principal reduction without penalty. So that's very important for you in terms of the flexibility under this program. So what can you use these funds for? Well, first of all, it's any working capital expense, any operating expense. So things like payroll, rent, marketing, internet services, rent, purchasing your inventory, whether it's raw materials or finished goods that you're buying from someone for resale. What also you can do with these funds now is if you have debt in the business name that maybe carries a higher interest rate than what you would have to pay for these funds, then you can use those funds to prepay the debt obligations, with the exception if you have a loan that is supported by a federal program, like another loan that has an SBA guarantee or USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture guarantee, or any other program that may be out there supported by a federal program. Those loans, you can only make the minimum payment required on the loan. So again, debt in the business name, with the exception of federal debt obligations, may be paid in full with these proceeds. All right. So that's what we've got. That incorporates all of the program updates for the economic injury disaster loan. Now we're going to move along to the grant programs. The Targeted EIDL Advance, noted here on the left, is a program up to $10,000. If you applied for an EIDL last year and you received an EIDL advance of less than $10,000, you were given the opportunity or the invitation to apply for a targeted EIDL advance and a supplemental targeted advance in February of this year. And the targeted EIDL advance gives you the opportunity, if you are invited to apply, to obtain up to $10,000 for funding, and it is a grant. You had to meet the criteria of the following. One is that your business has to be located in a low-income area as designated by the link in the mapping tool at sbaidl.policymap.com/app. And it has to be the physical address of your business. All right. You also had to have demonstrated more than a 30% revenue reduction beginning March 2nd, 2020, as compared to the prior year for 8 consecutive weeks. All right. And then again, for employee numbers, you have to have 300 or fewer employees. For the supplemental targeted advance, again, your business needs to be in that low income area based on the mapping tool. However, the other 2 criteria are that you have to have demonstrated 50%, more than 50% economic loss during an 8-week period starting May 2nd, 2020, as compared to 2019. So in both these cases, you're demonstrating significant economic injury in terms of revenue reduction. For the supplemental targeted advance, you have to have 10 or fewer employees. So what I want you just to understand is that, again, if you applied last year, then you could have had an EIDL advance, you may have a targeted EIDL advance, and you may have a supplemental targeted advance, but the combination of those 3 advance products cannot exceed $15,000. Okay. If you applied this year, then you would have automatically been considered as for the targeted EIDL advance. And at varying times here during this year, you would have either been invited to apply for the targeted EIDL advance and the supplemental, or it was incorporated most recently into the online application. So those, again, grant programs are the EIDL Advance from last year, the Targeted EIDL Advance, and Supplemental Targeted Advance for this year. Next slide, please. One thing that I do want to emphasize with the grant programs is that, again, you have to have your business located in the mapping tool area, and it's either yellow or purple. And I believe the purple is the low income designated areas, and it's readily available when you're looking at the mapping tool on site. If you have a home-based business, then the address would be your home that you would be checking. And that mapping tool is what we were mandated by Congress to use. So there are no exceptions. Either you're in the mapping area or you're outside the mapping area as a designated low income area. I do want to point out that no targeted EIDL advances or supplemental targeted advance funding will occur after 12/31 of this year. So if you have not applied and your business is in one of those low income areas, you may want to go through the EIDL Advance application process to be able to access the targeted EIDL Advance and supplemental targeted advance. You do not need to accept an economic injury disaster loan, even if you're approved for one. You can just opt for accepting the grant programs that you're eligible for. Next slide, please. Now we're going to talk about the top decline reasons. And this is the scary part of the application for most small business owners, because when they get a decline, they're not sure what to do or sometimes what this information means. So let's walk through them. The first one is unsatisfactory credit history. Well, what does that mean? Simply that when your credit report was pulled, there is something on the credit report that has some derogatory impact on your credit score. And it may be a score that ends up being lower than the minimums required under the two loan amounts that are where they vary. So either it could be below 570 or below 625, depending on your loan amount. So what do you need to do? Well, you need to demonstrate what you have done to correct whatever issues there are that are problematic on your credit report. And what I want you to understand is that you have the opportunity to get a free credit report from Experian, Equifax, or TransUnion once a year. It does not impact your score at all because it is what we consider a soft pull rather than a pull done by a lender. And you have the ability to take a look at what is on there that may be creating problems. All right. So once you clear that up and or you start making payments, get past due accounts cleared up, you then have the ability to go back to the SBA with the supporting documentation and the current status of your credit history and ask for a reconsideration and re-pull of your credit score. All right, so the next one is the SBA was unable to approve the application because the business, together with its affiliates, reached the $10 million aggregate limit. Keep in mind that the individual business loans per entity may not exceed $2 million. So if you have multiple entities, they may be qualified for varying dollar amounts of loans. But when you hit that 10 million cap for your aggregate debt for all of your related businesses, then you're done. And so if you've applied for more than that, you will be declined, and there is no exception to that. The program is limited to $10 million per aggregate business relationship. All right. Next you may have a decline reason of ineligible non-US citizen status. So with these loans, you have to either be a US citizen or a legal permanent resident. So what you would want to do is provide documentation of your current status. That may be a legal permanent resident card, and we have to have the front and back of that card copied in a PDF format. And I'm going to say PDF format a lot because the one challenge that we have is these documents become unreadable for the loan reviewer. So having them in a PDF format individually based on the documentation you're providing is really critical to getting through the process efficiently. All right. So again, the non-US citizen status, again, you provide a legal permanent resident card front and back. Business activity not eligible. Well, sometimes businesses have a component of their operation which makes them ineligible. And one of them is if over 1/3 of your business revenue comes from gaming activities, then you're not eligible for an SBA loan. There are some states that have legalized the sale of marijuana. Washington State is one of them, but that is not eligible at the federal level. So again, some businesses simply may not be eligible based on the type of revenue that is generated by the business. So please look at that. Look at the eligibility requirements for your business type and make sure that you meet the eligibility criteria. That will help you tremendously before you do the application process. Another issue is simply failure to respond. One thing that the SBA does when they're doing the reviews is if they decline a request, they always send out a letter via email indicating what the decline reasons are and what documentation would be needed to get you through the application process and final review. So what you need to do is check your emails. You're looking for one that ends in @sba.gov, and you want to make sure that you've got all the information that is needed in that decline letter ready to go and into the SBA within the designated time frame of the application. In the past, some of the response periods were 3 days. Some of them were 7 days. So it was pretty narrow. But please, if you have one of those, just get the information into the SBA for review. We're going to talk about how to do that in a few minutes in terms of getting the information back to the SBA. And then the last one, which is a big catch-all, I must say, and that is unverifiable information. And what you're going to have to do there is provide as much documentation regarding the business existence, taxes, everything that is germane to your business operation. And we're going to go through the next slide specifically of what information would be available to address the unverifiable information decline. Next slide, please. Unverifiable information is a pretty big category, and it could have to do with your bank account information. It could have to do with identifying you, providing information on the legitimacy of the business being in operation on or before January 31st, 2020. So again, that's a very big focal date for eligibility. Could have to do with taxes, your social security number, or your tax identification number, just being an error transposition when you did your application. So let's kind of go through each one of these in terms of how to help you do the resolution. First of all, when you're doing your application, I cannot emphasize enough the fact that you need to really make sure you're putting in quality information in that document. For the 2019 and 2020 gross revenue and cost of goods sold, that's critical. Listing all of the owners is critical. Providing all of the email addresses of the owners is critical. Providing a valid routing number for your deposit account and valid account number is critical, because all of this helps you get through the process efficiently, and it gives the loan reviewer at the Office of Disaster Assistance the ability to take a look at your application and really make sure that you have an ability to repay and all the information is validated, and that you can get your money once you have been approved for a loan, get those loan documents back and get that money wired to your account. So the incorrect banking information usually starts with a typo of some type or a bad routing number for your institution. And by bad routing number, what I mean there is some institutions have a separate 9-digit routing number for wire transfers. I would encourage all of you to check your financial institution's websites to see if your routing number on your check, those first 9 digits, are the same as what the wire transfer routing number is for your institution. And then on your check, you should be able to see your account number. When you're loading that information to your application, please take a second and maybe third look to make sure that you have not done transpositions and that you have those numbers in there properly, because it can take several weeks for just your account number to be corrected so that you can receive a wire once you have your loan approval and have signed loan documents. So please don't let that happen to you. Generally, what the SBA does is they ask for a copy of a voided check to validate that as part of the corrective process. The next one is multiple different addresses. So here's what I want you to remember. You have a business license, typically. It may be local or it may be at the state level. If you are a corporation or a limited liability company or a nonprofit, you also have public record information with the state of Washington's Secretary of State. What I would encourage you to do before you do your application is go to each one of the relevant websites for your business operation. Take a look at the website and make sure all of the addresses are correct and match what information you are putting in your application. So for the Secretary of State, it is www.sos.wa.gov. For the Department of Revenue, it is www.dor.wa.gov. One thing I do want you to understand is that the Department of Revenue actually obtains this information from the state of Washington Department of Licensing. So if you do have to make any correcting entries on the Department of Revenue website, you actually do those in the Department of Licensing website, and then it transfers over to the Department of Revenue website information. So the Department of Licensing website is www.dol.wa.gov. Okay, for those of you who may be Uber drivers or professional drivers, you may only have a local license and not one with the state of Washington. So please be sure and include a copy of that document to evidence your existence of your business in terms of licensing. All right. Other documents that are billings, like your insurance, utilities, expenses, they all should have a mailing address on them, which again should match the information on the public records. Now we're moving along to the federal tax returns. Right now, the IRS is behind. So we are hoping that you filed your 2019 tax return, whether it was a 1040 or one of the business returns, timely for 2019. And the reason for that is because the SBA needs to validate the tax return information related to your business, revenue, cost of goods sold, and some of the operating expenses from the Internal Revenue Service return that you filed. So when you're filling out the application, you are putting in your 2019 gross receipts and cost of goods sold, as well as your 2020 gross receipts and cost of goods sold in most cases, or other information that should be evidenced by what is on your tax return. The SBA is required to go back to the IRS and ask for a transcript. And in order to do that, you have to sign a document called a 4506T. And we're going to go through that document toward the end of this presentation so you know what a good quality document looks like. All right. But these tax transcript requests can take anywhere from a week to 2 weeks or more to obtain from the IRS. And the IRS has very strict rules about who these transcripts will be provided to. And by doing the 4506T and completing it accurately, you are giving the SBA permission to obtain a transcript of your 2019, 18, and 17 tax returns. Okay, it's very important. So we hope that your 19 was filed. If you weren't in operation in 18 or 17, no problem. Leave all those dates on the tax transcript request. That's fine. If they're not there, they're not there. But what we're really looking for is the 2019 information. Okay, so keep that in mind. We'll go through that 4506T here shortly. Now, if you have an employer identification number or a social security number error or mix-up, all right, that is because your data input on your application is different than what is on your tax return. Okay, or you could have a transposition. Sometimes you may come up as being deceased because that social security number that you put in that had transposition was for someone who actually has passed away. So you could get a decline where you are no longer among the living. Okay, so what we want to do there is make sure that you have proper information, get that back to the SBA. Copy of your social security card would solve that issue, and a little bit of an explanation about I must have put a social security number in by error. Okay, correct number of employees. This is really important because it has to do with the grant side of the application more so than the EIDL, the economic injury disaster loan application. So if you are mixing numbers in your application numbers, this can be a problem. So just make sure you're putting down an accurate number of employees. Regarding the ownership percentages, it's very important that you put down 100% of the ownership in the application, because that information matches back to some of the transcript information that is provided to the SBA from the IRS. And it also is an indicator of who is required to be a signer and a guarantor on your loan. So make sure you've got 100% of the owners listed as part of your application. If you have had a change in ownership since the time you applied, you will need to provide a document to explain why the change in ownership occurred, right? So just keep that in mind. And if you have purchased a business and that purchase was after January 31st, 2020, the only eligible businesses are those that are purchased from a family member, and you need to document that as part of your reconsideration process. All right. Again, I've talked about the information regarding revenue and cost of goods sold. The revenue and cost of goods sold for 2019 are the factors that actually indicate what your loan amount is. So when we're validating that information from your tax transcript from the IRS to what you put in your application, if there are errors there, then that creates a problem in your loan processing. we have a document to help you do a repair on that, which I'll be going over here shortly. If you have a little bit of waffling on the date your business was actually operated, what I want you to think about is January 31st, 2020, you really should have had revenue generated on or before that date and have had your business legally organized on or before that date to be eligible for the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. The other thing is, if you sometimes send in too much information, then you may have a mixed bag of information or conflicting data. And what I always want you to do is make sure that your information is consistent. And I'll give you an example of that right now. If on your tax return for 2019, your business income and or revenue is reported as $100,000, and you are now applying for the grant information, you need to make sure that your total revenue listed on a monthly basis for 2019 does not exceed the amount of revenue that you reported on your tax return. So it's very important that you really clearly understand what you're putting in and how that impacts your application. And I'm going to just stop for just a second, and because I'm not seeing the slides.
Yeah, I think we had some technical difficulties. I am pulling them up here. I think Margot's logging back in with that deck.
Okay.
So hold on 2 seconds while we get this figured out.
No problem.
And thank you all to all the participants for your patience with us. All right. I think I'm going to go ahead and try to share mine here. Let me make sure I get the right. Oh, hold on. All right, I think we were just at the reconsideration request, right?
Right.
Okay, so I will go ahead and I'm going to try to share my slides.
All right.
And see if we can get this back up and running.
It's always so much fun doing stuff.
I know. Well, we have some new features. So again, thanks to everyone for their patience. Let me just make sure this is going, and hopefully this now will work. Do you all see my slides?
I absolutely do. And that was
okay.
The next slide that I should be on. So thank you very much, Christine.
Okay.
All right. So in the reconsideration request process, what may you be requested to provide by the Office of Disaster Assistance? You will be asked to provide potentially an IRS form 4506T. And I've said that one ad nauseum. We're going to go over some examples of those documents here toward the end. So just keep that one in mind. As far as identification goes, if they need you to provide identification and you're a US citizen, you can provide a valid driver's license front and back, or a copy of your passport. If you are a legal permanent resident, then you again would provide the front and back of your LPR card. All right. If you're having problems with your account and getting funding done, you will need to provide a copy of a canceled check or voided check. And again, make sure that the business name matches your application. Why do I say that? Well, sometimes your legal entity name may be something like Janie Sacco Incorporated, doing business as Janie's Jewels. Well, if your application is in your legal entity name, which it should be, which in this example would be Janie Sacco Inc., then the trade name is all that is showing on my check that I voided here and provided to the SBA. Then Janie's Jewels is appearing on that check, not the legal entity name. So you would want to have some validation, bank account statement, or something from your financial institution indicating that the account really is established in your legal entity name and is doing business as your trade name. That way, everything links together and it is supported by the public record information on either the Department of Revenue website or a combination of the Secretary of State and Department of Revenue website. Okay, that's the business name. The other thing that's important is the address that's on the check. So if the address is different for any reason from the business address physically or a mailing address that you may have as part of the public records, then you need to address why it is different. That is really critical too, because we want to make sure that we are dealing with a legitimate request for funding and that there is no bad activity involved in this transaction. The other thing that you can be asked to supply are the federal tax returns for 2019 and 2020, if available, and is very important to include all of the schedules, including all of the K-1s that are tied to your tax return. The next thing that you may be asked to provide is an Sba Form 2202, a schedule of liabilities. What I really want to emphasize here is that if you have business debt and accounts payable in the business name, those are the obligations that need to be listed on this document. If you have no lines of credit or credit cards or term loans or accounts payable in the name of the business, you can write not applicable on the document. That's perfectly fine. In any case, you do need to sign and date the document in order for it to be a correct statement before you send it back to the SBA. Some other additional supporting information that you may be asked to supply are 12 months of bank account statements reflecting the revenue, and that's to support the monthly income that you're putting on your application. You may need to provide the IRS letter that has your employer identification number on it. You may be asked to provide a lease agreement so that the SBA can validate when your business actually went into a particular location. Things like business insurance or other expenses, invoices for your utilities also would be an indicator of when your business was established and when you went into a particular location, if you had a location address change. And again, the corporate good standing, that can be obtained from either the Secretary of State website or the Department of Revenue website. Could be a PO box receipt, again, utility payments I said earlier. So this kind of information is designed to validate the location and eligibility dates on your business in terms of when it actually got started, if it was close to the January 31st, 2020 date. And as I indicated earlier, if you were declined for unsatisfactory credit, please address in as much detail as is warranted to address the issues that you were having historically with your credit and why they occurred and how you are resolving them. And as I said earlier, each one of the documents that you provide should be scanned in individually, and they should all be scanned in a PDF format for easiest processing by the SBA, Office of Disaster Assistance. Next slide, please. Okay, verification of business. This is really critical. Again, your business had to be in operation with revenue generation on or before January 31st, 2020. So think about what we talked about already. The documents such as a business license or a registration for public records. These are all on the website. And the other thing that I want you to check when you're on especially the Secretary of State website, that lists all of the owners that are governors of the business. That should match what's information is on your application. The Department of Revenue website also has a limited number of governors or owners listed they should be on your application as well. So anything that you have that can validate that your business was in operation on or before January 31st, 2020 is vital to getting through the eligibility process. Next slide, please. Now we're going to talk about how to submit this information for reconsideration. And I'm going to just say some of these things have changed recently. And we were just given this information toward the end of last week. So if you talked to us before Thursday of last week, we may have told you something different. So here's the thing. Effective September 24th, when these loans were going in for reconsideration on an original loan, the decline must request, you have to request a reconsideration by going into your portal and clicking on the request reconsideration button. All right. And that was key. A lot of times, though, what happened is when people went back into their portal, they could not do anything. All right. So if that's the case for you, then you can submit your information via PDC reconsideration at sba.gov, the email that's listed here. All right. And when you do that, you want to address all of the documentation to support the decline reasons that are listed in your decline letter. All right. For those of you who may have been declined for a targeted advance or supplemental targeted advance, then you have to send your supporting documentation to targeted advance evaluation at sba.gov. All right. So what happened last week was there was a slight transition here, and the portals should be reopened for you if you had a decline, and those applicants who now are addressing their decline reasons should no longer have to submit your information through these email addresses that I just gave you. You should have the ability to go into your portal and submit the documentation that way. And that's more efficient than doing the email process. The most important thing out of all of this is that if the SBA has not asked for particular documentation, don't worry about submitting more than is necessary. And the key here is that unsolicited documents submitted via email will not be considered. So we want to make sure that you're focused on just addressing the decline reasons, and that's it. So don't give an abundance of information that may not be necessary. Just stick with the needed data and get it back through the portal. And then if you can't get it back through the portal, use the email addresses. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk about the documents that are required and what they do. So if you have a request for your tax return, that simply means that the SBA, when they're looking at the transcript from the IRS, is missing some information they need to validate. So please send in your 2019, your 2020 tax return, whichever is needed, maybe both of them, including all schedules. All right. And again, do a separate scan of your 2019 return and a separate scan for your 2020 return. And again, this IRS Form 4506T keeps coming up because this is a holdup for many of you trying to get your information validated from the Internal Revenue Service. And again, I'm going to go over those documents here in just a minute. The SBA Form 3501, what that enables you to do, if you didn't put all of the owners on your application, The 3501 document allows you to now list all of the owners up to 100% of them on the document and validate the business address, the legal entity name, and certain data like that to help you through this process. The 3502 form actually has you certify what the 2019 revenue and cost of goods sold was as reported on your 2019 return. And this form allows you to correct any erroneous information that you put in your application. So that's a great document to have. And then specifically for loans that are more than $500,000, we're seeing new forms come up as being needed. The P022 form is what's called a standard resolution. Don't let these words scare you. All that document does is it says for a specific legal entity, you're listing all of the individuals who are authorized to sign on behalf of the company to take on debt or pledge collateral. And then one person of those signers attests that that information is true and correct. So at the top of the form, you're putting your application and your loan number. It's consistent on all of your debt. It's the same application and same loan number. So if you're going in for an increase, and you can go in for multiple increases over time, so long as it's on or before December 31st, 2021, and you put in that original application number and your loan number. And then again, there are two blanks for your legal entity name, two different areas. And then as you go into the body of the document, it shows you who is listed to sign or to indebt the company, and then one person attests at the bottom. Make sure that you put all the titles in there and the date you're signing the document, and make sure it's a complete form. An incomplete form does you no good, okay? So just make sure you're filling everything out correctly. If you have any questions about that, you can always give us a call. All right, the form 2202 is a statement of liabilities or schedule of liabilities. We've talked about that already in this presentation. It's your accounts payable, credit cards, lines of credit, term loans that are in the name of the business only. All right, don't put down personal obligations. It's not about your lease expense. None of that. It's just debt related, because we need to know what your monthly payment is so that we can calculate a debt coverage ratio and evidence an ability for you to repay an economic injury disaster loan. Again, for loans that are over $500,000, a personal financial statement is required. It is the form 413 that is required on each 20% or more owner in your business. And then if the business itself owns real estate, there is a schedule for you to complete to indicate what real estate is owned in the name of the business. And as I said earlier, the SBA will do a deed of trust filing behind existing deeds on any real estate that is held in the business name to support those loans that are above $500,000. Next slide, please. We're powering through and we're almost done. I know we're at 2:30. I may go about 5 minutes over, so forgive me here. The system generated 4506T document. This is the stinker document that everybody has a problem with. First of all, it says COVID loans right underneath the system generated 4506T document. This document will self-populate from your application information. And you do need to send the document in as part of your application. However, this document may not be accurate for getting an IRS transcript pull. Why do I say that? Because your current address that populates in this and the name of the business that populates in this may not be how your 2019 return was submitted to the IRS. So We're going to show you what you need to do on a manual document if that is the case. Next slide, please. Although this is a little bit busy looking, what I want you to see is that on the 4506T form on 1A, if you have a business tax return, meaning that you have a 1065 or an 1120 or 1120S or a 990 or a 990EZ, line 1A should be the name of the legal entity exactly as it is on the 2019 tax return. If there's misspellings on it, capitalizations, lowercase, doesn't matter. It has to look exactly the same as what was on the 2019 business name for the return. 1B is your employer identification number. If this is a business return, you can ignore lines 2A and 2B because they are not applicable. On line 3, again, you put the legal entity name as it appears on your tax return for 2019 and the business address exactly as it appears, lowercase, uppercase, lowercase, commas, periods, dashes, whatever, including a room or suite number, the city, the state, and the zip code, all as it appears on your 2019 return. And then you have to do one thing else. If you had the same return type filed in 2018, you need to look at the 2018 address filed for that return. If it is different than that address in any way, as compared to the 2019 return, you have to write on line 4 the 2018 address as it appeared on that tax return. Then you drop down to 5B. That is your application number that you were provided on your economic injury disaster loan. Next slide, please. At the bottom of the form on 6, that blank to the right of it, what you need to put in there is your tax form type. So again, if it's a business return, it's going to be a 1065, 1120, 1120S. It can be a 990 or 990EZ. Then you go down to 6C as in cat, and you mark that box. Then you drop down to the bottom of this where the signature page portion is, and at step 7 on the left next to signatory, you have to mark that box because that attests that whoever is signing this document is authorized to do so on behalf of the entity. You put the title of the person who is signing the document. There are very specific titles that are allowed. If it's a corporation or a limited liability company, as a corporation, you would put president or secretary. If it's a partnership entity, you would put partner. If it's a limited liability company, you would put managing member or member. And if it's a nonprofit, you would put executive director or whoever is authorized to sign on your return. You also need to date the form and put a contact phone number for the signer on this document. That is all very specific. Now I'm going to ask Christina, could you go back up to the top to the prior page? Thank you. If you are filing your information through a Schedule C on your personal tax return, your 1040, what you need to do is follow the same rules, except if your return is a joint return, then you do have to fill out 2A and 2B as indicated on your 2019 1040 return. The same rule applies if it's a 1040. You have to go back and look at your 2018 return to look at the address. If there are any changes in that, then you need to write down the 2018 address on line 4, okay? And I skipped line 3 because what you're putting there is the personal name or names of the individuals that are on line 1A and 2A, and then your current address as indicated on the 2019 1040 return. Okay, again, 5B is your application number for your EIDL, and that's all standard. Next slide, please. What I want to point out, if you're using a 1040 return, on the blank to the right of 6C, you're going to write 1040. And again, mark 6C as in cat for record of account. Mark the signatory box, and only one signer on a joint return is required here. And because it's a personal return, you do not need a title. You do need to date it and put a phone number for the person signing this document. If you can do all of that the first time through, your processing of your loan is going to go much faster through everything. Okay, so next slide. We're at the end. And if you do have any questions regarding the economic injury disaster loan, you can contact the customer service number, the 716 number. There are 3 prompts there, or we are happy to help you at the SBA Seattle District Office. You can reach us at 206-553-7310 or sending us an email at info.sdo@sba.gov. Thank you very much for your attention today. I'm going to turn it back over to Christina.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Janie. And we are running late, so I know we've been answering Q&A right here live as we've been going through that. And so I want to make sure that you all know that we are recording this webinar, and we'll send out a transcript of all the questions and answers, the links to the webinar, the slides, and the resources as a follow-up to you. So we're going to go ahead and, because we're running late, conclude our program for today. I want to thank all the speakers for giving us your time and expertise today. We appreciate you all very much. I want to thank again all the partners here we see on our screen for all their hard work and what they're doing for our business community. I want to make sure you bookmark this site, oneeastside.org/spark. This definitely is a place where you're going to find key resources, information on our one-on-one advising, our weekly webinars, and any grant opportunities as they become available. And I want to thank you all for participating in our webinar today. So until we see you again, this concludes our program. Thank you.